everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Thank you for everyone who has come and supported me once again, and also for clicking on this video, because I feel like these type of videos that I do are the most important ones for you guys to watch, because they really just, I feel like, prepare you for the stuff that is like going on out there in the world that maybe you didn't know about, or you don't know that's being reported on as much. But as you probably guessed from the title, we are going to be talking about two individual murders today that actually helped solve one to another. Before we get into today's video, obviously I just want to be putting out a big disclaimer. We are going to be talking about two very different murders, one of which is involving a minor, and the other is actually more to do, basically, I feel like, with abuse within a relationship. So if you are going to be affected by that, guys, please think before you watch this video. So both of these murders actually took place in the UK in Hull, and if anyone is from that area that is watching this, please let me know if you remember these two cases. The first case we are going to be talking about involves a 9-year-old boy called Christopher Laverick, and he was actually murdered, and he went missing in 1984. The day he went missing was the 9th of March 1984. He was actually staying with his auntie and uncle at the time, and his auntie at the time actually worked at a bar. So as you can imagine, someone who works at a bar works different hours all the time, even during the night times. Because he was living with his auntie and his uncle, she had to leave him on his own, as his uncle was also at work. And I mean, back in 1984, no one really thought that leaving a 9-year-old at home would be of any significance. I mean, even into the early 2000s, I really don't feel like anyone had a concern about leaving their child at home, especially when they were in their own home. Unfortunately though, after Christopher's uncle finished work, he actually decided to go to the pub where his wife was working, and he had a few drinks whilst he was there. So once he went home, he instantly knew that something wasn't quite right. The house was completely turned upside down, and instantly he realised that Christopher was nowhere to be seen. Because this case was back in the 80s, as you can imagine, they did not have the type of stuff that we do when someone goes missing, so like social media, DNA, anything like that. They did not really have the type of technology we did. So when Christopher was reported missing by his uncle, police literally done all they could to try and search for Christopher. They put out missing person posters, they went to the news, they tried to do really as much as they possibly could. They had several suspects at the time, but because there literally was not enough evidence linking back to that person, they really couldn't do anything. The only thing that police could really rely on was someone in the public having information that they could basically pass on, or even the person who had kidnapped Christopher coming forward and saying what had actually happened to this 9-year-old. But as you can imagine, nothing happened. So on the 11th of March, only 2 days later, a man was walking his dog across the river, and he actually spotted a bag floating, and once he got a little bit closer, he realised that there was actually a child's body inside this bag. So he called police, and they could instantly tell that this was the body of 9-year-old Christopher, and they could clearly tell that Christopher had been murdered. And the way he was found, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but they could tell that maybe there was other elements involved in this murder. Obviously, once they found out that Christopher had been murdered, it was, you know, this massive manhunt. They needed to find this person who had broken into Christopher's house, auntie's and uncle's house, and kidnapped a 9-year-old boy and then murdered him. And literally the police, again, once they found out that Christopher had actually been murdered, they literally interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people trying to get some sort of information, but as you can imagine, nothing came of this again, and the case literally went cold. There was hundreds of different detectives put onto this case because they didn't know if they had a serial killer on the loose or someone who was going to start kidnapping other young boys and girls and start to murder them in their homes. So as you can imagine, Hull at this time was in a really dark place, and they just didn't feel safe knowing that the police were literally unable to get the slightest bit of information about what had happened to Christopher or who had done this to Christopher. So we're now going to skip forward to 2005, so many years later. The case of Christopher was cold, there was no more leads, nothing happened for Christopher's case. Unfortunately, this next case it's very upsetting, but this case actually helped to solve Christopher's murder. So it's kind of, I mean, for something really bad to happen to then help solve another really bad thing is just absolutely awful. But they both ended up getting justice in this case. In 2005, Ray Higgins was the detective superintendent in charge of the major crime investigations within Hull. And on Valentine's Day of 2005, a call came in reporting a girl called Joanne Nelson. She was 22 years old and her fiance had just rung up, worried that something bad had happened to her. Paul Dyson was Joanne's fiance at the time, and he'd basically called up crying, saying like, there's something not right here, you guys basically need to come and investigate. He said that morning he went and he said goodbye to his fiance. She normally left after him, he had to go to work before her. So nothing had really seemed amiss there. But then when he got home, he said that he instantly knew something wasn't right. So Joanne's car was actually left on the driveway, and when he went up to the door was unlocked. So as you can imagine, he was a bit confused. She was nowhere to be seen, but the door was unlocked and her car was left on the drive. He said this was very unlike her. You know, if she was to go anywhere, she would have let him know. He started to call family, friends, seeing if maybe she just walked somewhere, maybe she didn't go to work. And as you can imagine, no one had seen her, and Joanne had actually never gone to work that day. Everyone described Paul and Joanne as a very sweet couple. Joanne was a small, blonde, petite, very shy, according to some people who had met her person, whereas Paul kind of helped bring out her, you know, more energetic side, more out there side. So the two kind of brought out the best in each other, is what people were saying. Because this was so out of character for her to not tell anyone where she was going, detectives immediately thought, okay, there must be something wrong. Very strange as well that she left the whole house unlocked. So they instantly got some detectives on the case and started to do a search of the area, asking anyone if they'd seen her or anything like that. Again, in this case, the police were very thorough. Any sightings that even resembled Joanne, they would go and search. But as you can probably imagine, nothing again turned up for her. And at this point, her fiance Paul really was emotional. He was crying all the time. He was begging for, you know, everyone to help and to try and find her. And in resulting in this, he actually done a police interview. So in the interview, if I can find it, I will play the clip, but if not, I will describe it now. In the interview, he is really emotional, so he's really crying, struggling to get his words out. He's just asking for either Joanne to come home or for whoever knows anything about her to basically just tell the police so that they can bring her home. And once you find out what actually happened, after watching that interview, I had a gut feeling that it wasn't real, purely because of his hand gestures. He was playing a lot with his hands, and when he was crying, there was water under his eyes, but the amount that he was expressing this sadness did not match up to the tears. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone, but you know, when you're really full on crying, your nose is running, you've got spit running down your mouth because you're trying to get these words out, and you've got like a face covered in tears. But when watching the interview, it really just seems that he was faking it. At this point, police actually didn't know that Paul even done an interview, and he never actually told police, which I think is strange, that he was going to do this interview, because more than likely it's actually the police who urge people on to do a news interview to get it out there more. But Paul went off his own back and he went and done this himself. By this point, all police had to go on was what Paul had to say. And obviously, once they saw he went on this interview, they kind of got a gut feeling that something really was not adding up. Police started to look more into what Paul had actually told them that day, and they said that basically he'd mentioned that her keys were gone, her bag was gone, her work clothes were gone, yet her car was actually left unlocked, and so was the house, which got people a bit confused, because why would you unlock the car but not lock the house? Or why would someone take you from the house and then unlock your car and then take you? Do you understand what I mean? Like, it just wasn't really adding up. The police would expect either one or the other to be locked up, so the car to be locked but the house to be unlocked, or the house to be locked up and the car to be locked. So she would have either got kidnapped at her front door or by her car. When they looked into Joanne's phone records, they actually noticed that her phone was never used that day she went missing. It wasn't used at all, which again was really suspicious, because surely she would have had to go on there if she had work, maybe alarms or anything like that, but she didn't use that phone at all up to any point in that day. And after she went missing, her phone was never used again. When obviously she was first reported missing, the police done a little search of the house and the car, and there was literally no sign of a struggle, which you would presume there would be some sign of a struggle, especially if she was to have been kidnapped outside her car or her front door, because surely the person who was kidnapping her would have either had to have known her, or you know, they had some sort of elaborate plan where no one in the street could see. Which, that got me the most, like, why people just didn't think straight away, hold on a minute, how could someone literally get kidnapped while people are going to work on her front doorstep or outside her car? At this point, obviously, Detective Ray Higgins thought that something definitely was up with this Paul. The interview, everything like that, it just was not adding up. And then they started to ask his work colleagues and everything like that a little bit more about what he was like. And he actually used to be a bouncer, so they thought, we'll go interview some of them. And when they asked what Paul was like, they said that he was a nice man, but he had a very on-off again temper, which red flags. So they thought, okay, let's look into some CCTV, let's see if we can catch Paul doing anything weird on the day that she went missing. But literally, he had the exact same routine. He done what he said, he went to work, he went to the gym, whatever, and nothing seemed amiss. But they had the thought, what if something had happened the day before? So they went back through CCTV, and what do you know it, the day before he reported his fiancée missing, they caught him on CCTV doing something very strange, considering he then reported his fiancée missing. Ray Higgins actually got a call from a shop owner as she noticed the person on the TV interview as Paul, and she said that maybe, you know, there's some CCTV footage they might want to see from her shop. When they went to see the CCTV, they actually caught him buying bin bags and cleaning products, which, going back to the interview, they realised as well that after watching his hand movements and how much he was like using his hands to talk, they'd actually missed something. He had 2 scratch marks on his hand around this area, and it is very well known that if someone's getting strangled, the first instinct is to grab this side of someone's hand to pull them away. And as most of you are probably going to guess, it is very well known that people who have been charged with strangling someone murdering someone, they always have claw marks or scratch indents in this side of their hand. And as you guessed, Paul had that exact same mark. They then started to look into Paul's history even more, because now they were really concerned, but they needed just a bit more information. So they actually went to Paul's ex-wife, and she reported that Paul was really violent with her. He would hit her all the time. He even beat her up on their wedding night. On one point on their wedding night as well, he actually got her in a headlock and she passed out because clearly she couldn't breathe. But luckily she survived that and she ended up getting a divorce from him. And only to add more to Paul's story, it was actually found out that Paul's dad had served time for 2 separate murders. So, I mean, maybe murder runs in the blood, I'm not saying that, but it was just adding a little bit more like, well, what is going on in Paul's life? He seems really emotional, he seems all this stuff, but, you know, even his own dad is a murderer. Not only this, but through finding out that his dad had served time in prison, they actually found out through some other inmates that he had actually been in contact with some of the criminals in the prison, asking them the day before his wife went missing, how does he get rid of DNA easy? Unfortunately, a few days later, Paul's own mother went to the police station and she told them that Paul had actually told one of his very close friends that he did murder Joanne and that he had disposed of her body in a rural area, and all she had to say really was that the murder was over a silly argument. The mother then said that he wrapped Joanne's body in bin bags, and obviously from the CCTV footage it was quite clear that, you know, these bin bags were used to wrap Joanne's body. He then drove and drove as far as he could in Joanne's car, and he just carried on driving and not knowing what to do. And he found a rural area and he literally just tried to get through this gate. And he mentioned that the gate was actually a bit weird because it had broken bottles around it, and instead of opening outwards, it opened like inwards. They went to go arrest Paul, and with the information that they had, they tried to get out of him, like saying like, look, we know that you murdered her, All we need to know is where her body is so we can return it to her families. So he did. He admitted that he murdered his fiancée and that he'd just wasted all of this time to really cover his own tracks. Like, I really don't feel like if his mother would have gone into the police station, he would have ever felt guilty or reported himself. I feel like he probably would have just carried on living his life like his wife was missing. Police tried to get him to remember where he put Joanne's body. He said he couldn't remember because he was just driving willy-nilly. They literally put him in a car and they drove to different areas which he kind of described, with these broken bottles and the outwards pulling fence and all of this different stuff. But literally every place that they went, it was not the place where Joanne's body was buried. So at this time, a woman called Joanne as well and Stuart Valentine were called in to help search certain areas. So they were actually just kind of like volunteer, like professional searchers kind of thing. They had dogs with them, everything like that. And after 3 days of searching these different areas, there was literally no sign of Joanne anywhere. After this, Detective Ray Higgins thought he better call in some sort of forensic help. He actually called in someone called Pat, who helped to define different regions of our country, as it actually has its own DNA through stuff like pollen and everything like that. So this means that they can take mud and flowers from Joanne's car wheels and help to narrow down the area in which he had drove in. So they actually found pine, western hemlock and heather pollen, and this really helped narrow down the area in which he might have driven in. So through this they narrowed it down to one area and discovered Joanne's body covered in branches, and it had been 39 days since she was actually reported missing. So as you can imagine, it was not a very nice sight for detectives to find Joanne, and God rest her soul. It's just really horrific, because I think back, like when people were saying like she was shy and I think, was she shy though, or was this man really controlling over her? And she was only 22, a year older than me. Like, I just can't even imagine. Literally, thankfully, due to this pollen work, they helped find Joanne's body and help bring her back to her family, so they were able to give her a proper burial. So Paul was charged with murder and he even pleaded guilty, and he was given life behind bars, and I really hope that he stays behind there, because not only did he kill a 22-year-old innocent woman, he also used to beat up his wife, his ex-wife, and I mean, any person who wants to lay a hand on anyone in a relationship is honestly just sickening to me. So we're now going to go back to Christopher's case, right back in the beginning of this video. So as I was talking about, Pollen helped solve Joanne's case, and it actually was going to help solve Christopher's too. So because Pat had helped with this kind of forensic work, Ray Higgins really found this interesting, and he thought, well, you know what, you might be able to help us solve another case that we've not been able to solve. And the first thing he thought of was Christopher's case, a little 9-year-old boy back in the 80s, and it had never been solved. As you remember, they had multiple different suspects at the time, but they really had no evidence to really secure as to why one person might be guilty. So what Pat did was she took Christopher's clothes and tried to see maybe if there was anything on the boy's clothes that would maybe match to someone's specific garden. On the clothes, she actually found a type of stone that was only really used for water features. So it wasn't really a natural formed stone, it was more of a generated stone that would be put into water features. And along with that, she also saw little tiny bits of pollen which narrowed it down to the area in which Christopher was living in. Pollen actually also helped match to different things that you would find where chickens and ducks may be living. So they wanted to really narrow this down. So they knew whoever this was had chickens or ducks, and they also had a water feature, because before Christopher died, he was actually, from what Pat said, was on his knees, and that is how the pollen and the water feature stones got onto his clothing. So Melvin Reed, who was actually Chris's uncle, was the only person who had all of that. So not the uncle he was living with, a completely different uncle. He did in fact have ducks or chickens, and he also had a very large water feature in his garden. He was actually arrested in 2001 for abusing young boys. So I'm really surprised why they didn't think, like, you know, his young nephew was murdered and possibly other things. So why was this never looked into before? I really don't know. Melvin knew that Christopher was going to be on his own when, at the time, he caused a break-in, or a staged break-in, and kidnapped Christopher. Now, he knew that the aunt and the other uncle were going to be at the pub or at work, so he literally just knew that this opportunity was going to be waiting for him. Unfortunately though, up until this point, no one had suspected him, and he actually ended up dying in prison. So they weren't actually ever able to confront him about it, or even give him extra time in prison for young Christopher. That is really the end of the video, guys, and a case from the 1980s being solved because someone else's case was solved through pollen detection. I mean, that to me just is amazing. I know we've got a lot of more technology now, much more advanced from 2005, but during 2005, using that type of technology was really out there, and like, it helped save a, you know, very old case. And I feel like at least now people know what actually happened, and it's not constantly on people's minds, like, who actually murdered Christopher, because now they know. But unfortunately, as I said, he couldn't be prosecuted for it. I hope that it brought some more knowledge into the crime world. I didn't even know, even though I'd done criminology and law, that they could detect stuff like that through pollen. I did not know that. So when I saw this case, I was just like, oh my god, I've got to do it, because I don't think other people realise that you can, you know, detect stuff through that. So it's just another thing to put out there, that there is so much we can use now to help solve murders, and even cold cases like Christopher's. If you like these type of video, guys, and you want to carry on supporting and helping me do these types of videos, please like and subscribe, and I hope you all stay safe out there.